Edgar Degas, my exposure to Degas, and he was, by the way, an incredibly influential and also reclusive artist during the Impressionistic period. My introduction to his work was actually at the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena, California. If you watch the Rose Bowl parade at the end of every year, or I should say at the beginning of every year, you actually get a glimpse of the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena because it's right on the route of the parade. So Norton Simon was actually an American industrialist. You might remember the Hunt Foods Corporation or Canada Dry Corporation. He created a large both food and media conglomerate and was based in Southern California. His namesake is the museum which we're talking about. They actually have one of the finest collections of Degas's work with over, I think, 100 items, paintings, pastels, drawings, prints, and sculpture. It's the second largest in the US after the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. He was considered an exquisite draftsmanship. His subject matter was contemporary at the time, and it actually largely included ballet or dancers, bathing, portraits, working scenes, landscapes, and racehorses, of all things. His most famous sculpture, which probably everyone has seen an image of, and I think we have a few on our as backgrounds, is what's called Little Dancer. And Sarah will cover this piece of art in her talk. After Degas's death, the family authorized that copies be cast in bronze. So his studio was just incredible, and Sarah may talk about that. There were just thousands of items in the studio. His sculptures were done in wax largely, but after his death, the family authorized that they actually cast those sculptures in bronze so that they could preserve it and produce some additional copies of it. And a lot got sold as finished pieces. Total of 26 worldwide for the Little Dancer. And by the way, as a background, the original wax model Little Dancer was actually exhibited in the Paris Exhibition Hall of 1881, which is kind of a famous place where new artists, particularly Impressionistic artists, had an opportunity to kind of show their art. And it was really a place where artists brought their art to be judged by that point, at that time and place, kind of who were considered the classic or traditional artists of the time. And so it was they had a mixed reaction from the public in terms of a lot of his art, just like Rauschenberg, who we talked about earlier, had a mixed reaction. But after the exhibition, Degas kept the Little Dancer in his apartment until his death in 1917. So it's amazing that this little sculpture actually became as famous as it is today. So why don't we hand it over to Sarah? Hi, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. How are you? So Hilaire Germain Edgar Degas, or more commonly known as Edgar Degas, was born in 1834 to a moderately wealthy family in Paris. He was the oldest of 5 children, and his mother was actually Creole from New Orleans, and his father was a banker. And he was always encouraged to pursue his artistic passions, though maybe not as a full-time career. He earned his baccalaureate in literature in 1853, and then went on to be a copyist at the Louvre, even though his father wanted him to be a lawyer. And I love this story, but while he was copying a Velázquez painting at the Louvre, he met a man named Edouard Manet, another up-and-coming young artist at the time, who happened to be copying the same painting. And the two became friends, and this friendship was really instrumental to the creation of the Impressionist movement. And Degas is really seen as a leader and even one of the founders of Impressionism, even though he didn't want to be considered that. And there are some differences between his work and classic Impressionism that we'll see. The main one being that Degas' works were largely indoors, whereas Impressionism painters often painted outdoor settings and landscapes. And he really wanted to be remembered as a realist painter. But overall, Degas is widely known for his pastel drawings and oil paintings. And we haven't really focused on an artist yet that used pastel. And at the time, this was a more innovative medium to be working with. If you're not familiar, a pastel is usually in the form of a stick consisting of a powdered pigment and a binder. So the pigments used in pastels are similar to those In some other colored visual arts media, like oil paints, it's the same powdered pigments, and then it has a binder that's usually of a neutral hue. And so here is a portrait of Degas behind me. So Degas started as a history painter, but he later switched course and became more interested and more known for his close study of human behavior. And he took much inspiration from dancers and ballet culture in Paris at the time. So this painting is called The Dance Class, done in 1874, and is oil on canvas. And the remarkable thing about this painting is just the sheer amount of people in the painting. There's about 24 dancers and their mothers kind of watching this main dancer exhibit a specific move. And the whole class is being taught by Jules Perrault, the man with the cane, who was a famous ballet master of the time. And if you look next to the mirror on the wall, you can see a sign advertising Rossini's opera Guillaume Tell, which was an homage to the opera singer Jean-Baptiste Faure, who commissioned the painting. So the scene is set at a rehearsal room in the old Paris Opera House, which had actually burned down a year before this painting was finished and released. So in a way, this painting kind of became a representation of what the old opera house was. So this painting is called Dancer with Bouquet, done in 1877. And again, this is a clear example of his admiration for ballet and for dancers. And this painting depicts an interesting moment because it highlights the moment that she stops performing and takes her bow. But this painting still depicts kind of the movement and the angles that the human body forms when on stage and in front of a crowd. And here Degas uses pastels to enhance the colors, specifically the color of her skin. The yellow on her tutu is really vibrant. And you can see kind of the background of the painting, and the stage is done in darker browns and blues, but then the pastels really add a pop of color to the dancer, her tutu, and her bouquet as well. So AJ kind of gave you all some information on this. This is Little Dancer of 14 Years, and this is arguably Degas' most famous work. This was finished in 1880. And the piece is of a student at the Paris Opera Ballet, a Belgian girl named Marie van Gotham. And I always assumed that this sculpture was made of bronze, but actually Degas originally sculpted it using pigmented wax, which was kind of an unusual medium at the time. He also used some rope and clay for support of the sculpture. But as you can see, her dress is made out of real fabric. And most of the replications we see today in museums are casts of the originals. AJ said 24. I read somewhere that there's 26 or 20. I'm sorry, AJ said 26. I read somewhere that there's 28. So there's some debate amongst that. But the original wax sculpture is displayed at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. right now. And we can see the little girl standing in fourth position, which is a ballet position, with arms taut and nose to the sky. And this was first shown at the 6th Impressionist exhibit of 1881, and it had mixed reviews. Some critics really didn't like the snarl on her face, while others saw it as kind of a deliberate showing of ugliness, of an adolescent, being forced to do something they didn't want to. So here we have another group of ballerinas. This is titled Dancers in Blue, done in 1897. And the interesting thing about this piece and other works he created around this time is that Degas' sight was declining pretty rapidly. And we can see that this oil painting is much more blended with these kind of washes of color, as opposed to some of his earlier works that we just saw that were more defined in shape and line. And if anything, the decline in his sight could lead him to be categorized even more with Impressionists because of the blended color, even though, as I mentioned, he wanted to be seen as a realist. And that's true as well, because, he's focusing on the human experience and the complex study of human performance, which was definitely more of a realist characteristic, but maybe in terms of technicality and style, this resembles more Impressionism. And we're jumping around chronologically a little bit, and we're ending with Degas' oil painting called L'Absinthe, or In a Cafe, done in 1876. It depicts a woman and a man sitting side by side drinking absinthe. And usually a cafe at this time was a place of socialization and excitement. But as you can see, the couple looks pretty lonely and lethargic. And again, Degas plays with realism because the framing of this piece is meant to look like someone taking a snapshot. It's kind of a slice of life painting. Almost maybe you were walking by the cafe and you just peeked into the window and saw this couple. And we could see the effects of the absinthe on this couple as they become increasingly sluggish and inebriated. And Degas often asked his friends to pose for his work. And these are two of his model friends. And when this piece came out, it cast a bad reputation on the models. And Degas actually had to publicly make a statement that the two models were not alcoholics. So I hope you got just a small glimpse of Degas' ballet period. And we ended with L'Absinthe because now you will all hear from Paul Kotick. Please correct me if I'm pronouncing that wrong. But Paul will be presenting on the history of French absinthe. Thanks, everyone.